Oh, good morning, Adrian. How are you today?
Yeah, good, thank you. Welcome back. It seems a while since we did our last recording, but we always save it for the best stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It has been a little while, but then we've been busy doing other things, haven't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. And our priorities are always our clients.
Yeah, exactly. And so it should be. So I think today we thought we'd talk about red teaming, cover some case studies, and give the audience a bit of an overview of the thinking behind red teaming. What do you reckon?
Yeah, marvelous. Because I think a lot of people think that red teams are very different to what the actuality is. So let's dispel some myths and create the right persona for what red teams should and actually be.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll kick off and say um, my view of red teaming is this, that it's attempting to replicate the most significant and most likely styles of attack against a specific organization, usually and properly informed by a threat and risk analysis, which I think we'll talk about another time, in order to highlight, let's say, the most significant threat actors, their most likely methodologies, and the most likely target that they'll be after, whatever that might be, usually information or money, I guess. And
Yeah, so it's
uh,
like behavioral analysis, but on a company rather or
it,
organization rather than a person.
yeah, beautifully put. Thank you. Yes, exactly so. And I guess in its implementation, a well-designed red team has a storyboard first. And that storyboard, a bit like the storyboard for a movie or a play, is setting out each step, each stage, and also looks at different possibilities at each step. So, for example, if we decide that the red team is simulating, let's say, a criminal group who are attempting to steal credit card data from a retail organization, then the first step that the criminals would usually take would be background research, trying to see what they could find out about the business and, more importantly, about the potential target individuals in that business. Based on that, they'll move to stage two, which is usually social engineering, these days very often phishing or spear phishing. Then stage three, which is actually leveraging whatever access they've got at the spear phishing stage, and so on until they finally gain access to the data or the financial information that they're after and exfiltrate it or steal it from the business. And that same model can apply to pretty much any attack. But at each step, what you as the simulated criminal find is more information that helps you decide how better to take stage two, stage three, and stage four, and so on. And for the recipient organization, for the client organization, the key benefits, really, in my view, are that it's testing both your defenses, which is what most people think information security or cybersecurity is about, and their ability to detect and respond to an attack in progress, which is something that we know we both find often neglected. So it's exercising the defensive or protective controls, and it should also be exercising the detective controls and the responses to them.
Absolutely. So, from the red teams that certainly I've been involved with, they can take many forms. Sometimes they are tabletop exercises that you and I have conducted together in the past. Other times they are more active in terms of performing sort of more live scenarios and to see how defensive and how reactions of teams of people can occur, or sometimes they can be actual physical red team sessions as well, where you're actually performing more security controls upon premises in places teamed with others of either of those two exercises. Is that it? Is that your view?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we started doing this in my previous life, probably 12 years ago, 14 years ago, something like that, then a typical red team exercise was a real world exercise combining technical attacks and physical attacks and people attacks. Physical attacks sounds a bit violent, but what I really mean is you might have in parallel a series of phishing exercises with the objective of gaining legitimate credentials from members of staff. As we know, good hackers or good attackers, or successful attackers, I should say, typically don't break in, they log in. So one of the key first objectives is to steal those credentials. But at the same time, you're also perhaps testing the building security to see whether you can get into premises as a visitor or impersonating a contractor or a third party of some sort that would usually have legitimate access. Once inside, you can then deploy the credentials that were obtained through the phishing exercise, put those two things together, and you have really quite easy access to a business's key information, because every business I've ever looked at tends to be a bit like I think the term is it's like an M&M. It's crunchy on the outside and soft inside. And once you're past the physical perimeter and actually sitting on the internal network, which I have to say is a lot easier than you might imagine, and you're using legitimate credentials, there's really nothing to stop you at all. So yeah, it's a combination of those. But lately, a lot of businesses, especially small to medium-sized businesses, don't want to spend all the money and the investment in doing a full-scale red team exercise like that. So we'll sit around a table, and appropriately enough, I call that a tabletop red team exercise. It's a theoretical exercise where we explore in concert with the client where we think they might be vulnerable, how those vulnerabilities might be exploited by a criminal, and they can respond with what defenses they believe they have in place. And so long as both partners are transparent and honest in that exchange, it can be a really effective alternative to a full-scale red team exercise at a fraction of the cost.
Excellent. So, seeing as you are the let's analogize you as the Sun Tzu of red team exercises, shall we go into a bit more depth about what some of those scenarios can look like?
Yeah, sure. If I put my sanitizing brain on, I'll run you through a couple of examples from real world exercises. My favorite is probably, I've got several favorites. Probably one of the first we did was for an insurance company, where we were asked to see how good their physical defenses were in terms of being, a third party being able to get into the building, and if they were able to achieve that, what sort of access they could get. And because it was a long time ago, we didn't necessarily really go into as much depth with the client about who they thought this person might be and why they might be there. And that's something we learned as we went along, to try and get that up front, because otherwise the exercise might be good fun. It might achieve what we want to achieve, but doesn't necessarily demonstrate anything to senior management, because they say, well, who would do that? Why would they do it? Unless we thought about that up front. But anyway, it's a good story. So we turned up at premises, having had a look at them on Google Maps and Google Street View, usual stuff. And we determined that there was a car park out the back of the building. It's a single standalone building, fully occupied by one organisation, so it's not a shared premises. And there's a fire exit at the back of the building, which people would exit through and go to this sort of bus shelter thing in the car park to have a cigarette. Because this is probably a dozen years ago, smoking was more common, although I'm sure it still happens today. Anyway, it was reasonably nice weather, so we turned up there. My colleague dropped me off in the car park. I had a suit on, but I deliberately left my jacket in the car, turned my sleeves up a couple of turns, and went and sat in the in this bus stop thing, this bus shelter in the car park, smoking shelter in the car park, and chatted to people there. When they went back into the building, I went with them, of course, and they just assumed that I had come from inside because I looked as though I'd come from inside. That got me into the building easily. They even held the door open for me. No one questioned me or challenged me. Once they'd gone back to their desks, I physically, literally turned round, went back to that fire exit door, held it open, and my colleague came in with me. I let him in. We then thought, well, how are we going to kind of have a good recce internal view of this building, explore the building without raising suspicions? So we decided that I would continue my impersonation as a member of staff, and he would be a visitor. So I then showed him around the building as though I worked there. No one challenged us at all, of course. So that allowed us to walk around the entire, I think it was a 3-story building, and look for opportunity. And of course, the classic opportunity was a meeting room. We found an empty and unoccupied meeting room. We went in, plugged in a laptop into the nice live Ethernet connection in the floor, and found ourselves on the internal network. We didn't have any credentials with us, so we had to do a few tricky things on the Windows domain to gain access, but that's never hugely challenging, regrettably. So we had full domain admin access in about 20 minutes, which was fairly typical those days. And we were able to start exploring the entire network, looking for interesting information. And we would either plant a flag, which means putting a file somewhere that says, hello, we were here, Kilroy was here, or stealing a piece of information, copying it away, something not too embarrassing, of course, but something to demonstrate that we had access. So we sat in this meeting room for, I think it was about an hour and a half. And then someone came in and said, we've got the meeting room booked. And we apologized and said, I'm really sorry, we've overrun our time. There was no checks on this, of course, at all, no badges, nothing. These lovely people not only treated us as though we had the right to be there, they also helped us find an alternative space for us to meet in before they went back and had their meeting. And in the end,
very, very polite of them.
yeah, very kind and polite as people are. I do feel marginally guilty, I have to say, along the way doing these things, but there you go. So we're in the building in total for about 5.5, 6 hours. We had access to absolutely everything on the network, and we left again without being challenged. So, you know, that's it's a really good demonstration of how weak many businesses building security is. And I have to say, we did exercises of that nature, getting into buildings and sniffing around their networks for many, many years. And to my knowledge, in fact, I can guarantee you there was only one occasion where we weren't able to get access and thus access to the network. On every other occasion, and there were literally hundreds of them, we were completely successful in our objectives. So I think people don't expect an on-site attack. And despite having lots of rules about wearing badges and challenging visitors, people just don't do it.
And health and safety and fire evacuation procedures, and even people showing you their privacy policies these days.
Yeah. And policies and procedures are great, but they're meaningless unless you help the staff understand why they're important and how to implement them, you know, without disrupting their normal day-to-day activities. But the real core thing is the why. And one of the clever things that one of our clients suggested to us, and we took on board and did pretty much every time thereafter, was to use the output of a red team exercise to create training material to show to staff in order to help them understand why these things were an issue. So an example like I just gave could easily demonstrate why it's important to challenge people who weren't wearing a badge, why it's important to challenge people that you don't recognize, why it's important to have good Windows security, decent passwords on administrator accounts, lots and lots and lots of issues. And, you know, frankly,
Yeah, and with some of the examples that we've run, some of them with yourself as well, are creating training videos even around schools and other organisations where you can indeed use all sorts of tactics to manipulate these scenarios to gain access and entry to all manner of information.
yeah. So you really, you know, as I said at the beginning of that example, the key thing which we didn't do in the very early days because no one thought of it was who we were impersonating and what they were trying to achieve. Because we found that if we would present these generalized attack results to senior people or to members of staff, they'd say, yeah, I see the problem, but who's going to do that to us? So unless you've done that threat and risk analysis first, so that you know who you're impersonating and can speak as if you were them to say, this is what I'm after, it becomes a lot of waste of money and time, really.
Yeah, and that's what we're on about at the start of this video. Really, is about people don't realise the amount of work that go into the preliminary exercise again before actually performing the red team session itself. Actually going through and analysing the behaviours of the organisation and people within those organisations, and even going after some phishing and at some points, which we've done before, is some whale fishing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say attacks because they're not leveraged as such, but they're certainly trying to leverage the right information at the right time to gain access, gain entry, or gain the right information, whether it be by coercion or distraction tactics. So, in some terms, Pete, I could continue as the Darren Brown of some of those things, really.
Yeah. I think, you know, a good example of doing it right, briefly, was a client that had as part of their business a forensics laboratory, which was it was rented out to different organizations, including the police. And we sat down with them and said, what sort of individual or group or threat actor in general would be interested in this information and why? And we came up with a scenario where we were to impersonate a criminal gang who had a senior member currently under investigation for a quite serious crime, and the successful prosecution would hinge on the forensic analysis that this business was doing. So now we have a scenario that people can understand, can identify with, and is realistic. So when in their case, we went through quite a long and convoluted red team exercise to demonstrate how a criminal group like that may achieve access and, let's say, damage the forensic information so that it would no longer be useful in the prosecution of their capo, then that was a realistic scenario which everyone could identify with, that was genuine in that this could really happen. And that became a very, very powerful tool in educating members of staff as to why they needed to follow all of the advice that they'd been given, or the procedures that they'd been given about challenging people, about building access, about phishing, and all the other component parts. It became quite a big project in terms of rolling it out as an education program. And it was so successful and so poignant for members of staff there that people who attended the training actually recommended it to their colleagues. and said, if you haven't been on this, you need to go. It's fascinating. And I mean, how many organisations can say we've got cybersecurity awareness course that people actually want to go on?
Yeah, yeah,
And that was
exactly.
the client's idea, not mine, but it worked fantastically well.
But that's where some of the best ideas come from. Again, it's not only about doing that background piece of work at first, but it's about interviewing a lot of those senior members, not necessarily executive members of organizations, to get a good grasp upon what could be the best threat and risk scenarios to their organization.
Yeah.
And it's whilst you're talking to these people and while you're interviewing that you get the best insights into how those threats and risks could interact with the organization's data, with the organization's security, and with the organization's access.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, that's something I'd like to look at next time, is just talk through how we achieve that in a threat and risk session, which I think otherwise sounds like a very dry and boring process. You know, when you say to people, I'm going to audit you, they go, oh no. And if you say, I want to do a threat and risk analysis, they go, oh no, in the
Yeah,
same way. But
yeah.
actually, as a basis for not only a red team exercise, but eventually rolling out to a full cyber resilience strategy, it's critical and very informative.
And it's not just an IT activity. That's what people don't realize about red team exercises. Again, it is based upon a lot older security protocols, really, that were born many decades ago, and that have been utilized quite successfully, really, and kind of ported across to the IT world and cyber, as people like to term it these days. But again, the basis of a lot of these principles are around the security services.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think next time we should take a look at threat and risk analysis and how it feeds into red teaming. Do you think?
Yeah, that sounds a really good point. Again, without the fear of mentioning the audit word or risk as a bad or boring aspect of it, it is certainly a massive part of what we do and how we perform the absolute necessary to protect the brand of organizations, let alone just thinking about the security aspects. And generally the way people think about that these days is, oh yeah, I'll just buying some sort of phishing testing thing and I'll test on my people, and that's my cyber done for the year.
Yeah, that's another face palm. That's
Yeah.
okay, great. So I've really enjoyed. I could go on for hours about red teaming, of course, with lots more war stories. But let's not test our audience anymore. Eh?
Well, that's what the cyber information exchange is all about. And again, going off the back of these little example videos, really, of what we do and how we do it, we're reawakening the essence of what used to be the White Hats Forum, and coming later next year, I'm sure we will be evolving those into a lot more of what used to be team-based exercises and team-based discussions. So look forward to those in 2023.
Yeah, me too, my friend. Thanks so much for this morning. Great to speak to you as always.
No problem. Good to speak to you too.
Thanks, buddy.
Keep on protecting.
You too.